Hi, good morning, and welcome to our webinar to an introduction on locations. My name is Vitaly Kobyshев. I'm ftrack's regional sales manager for EMEA, and we're really excited to talk to you about how you can configure locations in ftrack Studio. Today, we're going to run through how ftrack locations are composed and how they work, how to register and use locations, what are components, user location tutorial, tips and tricks, and more. But before we jump in, I'd like to introduce my colleague who will be running the webinar, Lorenzo Angeli, our pipeline solutions architect who is based in Barcelona. Lorenzo?
Yes, sorry. Here I am.
Ciao.
Sorry.
Uh,
Thank you, Dali, for the introduction.
No worries. We expect the webinar to last about 45 minutes. Please do use the Q&A panel at any time, and we will try to get through to the questions at the end. Any questions we don't have time to answer, we will get back to you via email. So yeah, let's begin. Lorenzo, over to you.
Thank you very much. And welcome everyone to this new webinar. So this webinar, it's slightly different from the others that you might have been participating with us. This is possibly first of its kind. It's going to be more technical, and it's for us, of course, to try to understand how much interest there is about the technical part in webinars. So please let us know by the end of it, how was it, and whether the information we're bringing to you are actually helpful for your daily work. So as Vitaly introduced, this webinar will be about the location system of ftrack. We're going to try to disambiguate how they work, how to configure them, and customize them. The webinar will be composed into two main parts. We're going to pick up the first bit, and we're going to start simply looking what locations are and how to use them mostly. And in the second part, we're going to start drilling deep down on the technology that composes the location to try to empower you, basically, on what you can do with them. So location structures, assessor, how to customize them, how to provide you with the tools you need in order to do advanced things with this technology that we do provide. So first off, worth giving some basis of what you need to know in order to not to participate, but definitely to make the best out of this webinar. You need to have some Python knowledge. So of course, to navigate the code, understand what variables are, arguments, properties against methods, and this kind of stuff. Knowledge of the ftrack Python API. We won't be using that much, but a bit of a brief idea on how to query entities, how to set attributes might be useful. And then, of course, if you have been participating to the other webinars of mine about Connect, you already have this bit of experience, which is about publishing file, but this might be coming from your daily work as well, of course. Any kind of publishing, it's fine. It's as long as you are aware of what does happen when you do publish a file from a bird's eye view, let's say. Without further ado, let's get started. So let's start having an idea on the top-down view on how the location system works in ftrack. So on your left side, top left side, you have tools and integration. This can be ftrack Connect Maya. It could be one of your actions. It could be any code that runs on top of our ftrack API. So ftrack API is what you can install from PyPy, just in any Python environment, Python 2.7 or Python 3 as well. But the most important thing is what this system is composed of. So you have the ftrack API, which has the query system, which will let you fetch information from the server, the event hub, and the plugin registry. So the event hub and plugin registry is the real-time system of ftrack. Will let send real-time messages around, either local or remote. And the plugin registry is what takes care of actually registering the locations, and the API themselves is what will let you deal with the version and the rest. So what we do see here, of course, ftrack API will be interacting with the ftrack server, which has its own storage, which is the cloud storage. We have asset version, which contains components which are linked to our location. And location, of course, at this point, links to the single storages. If you do look into it, you can see the locations have other bits and pieces in it, which is the assessor and the structure. We're gonna start looking into them in details later on. But let's start again with a bit of an overview of it. So what is a location? So the location in ftrack really is a logical place where you're gonna save your data. And what the location really does provide you is a way to take control of this publishing system. The locations are first-class citizens, so which means are proper entities in ftrack. You can query for them, you can publish them, you can commit, you can delete them. And again, they represent a logical and physical place somewhere. It could be your desktop, it could be the central storage of your company, it could be a tape, it could be Amazon, AWS, it could be Dropbox, it could be any kind of place where your data lives, basically. Location, as we saw in the previous slides, are composed by assessor and structure. So this is the layering which location are composed of. And basically, the location wraps up all the complexity that lives underneath in the assessor and the structure, and simply provides a really high-level way to access these things. The locations, as we said, are registered server-side and are identified by a unique name. Of course, if you do need more location, think well about what the location names is. So, of course, if that is easy to identify. So local won't say much, but if you say user.local, might help identify where the file really lives. Benefits of location. So, of course, location brings a lot of benefits compared to just saving files somewhere. So, of course, using location allows you to take full control of the naming convention and the folder structure that will output the files when you do publish. You have full control of the storage type. Again, cloud, local, it could be a database, a MongoDB where you want to store the data and then you want to retrieve them as actual files. Each location, so we sell location as registered database, yes, but the location entity, we're gonna again look these in details later. But the location entity is registered remotely, but its plugins are local. So which means that you can have independent configuration based on the location itself. The ability, of course, once the file is tracked through the location, you will be able to query any location on whether the file is available and to what availability percentage is available as well. Transfer files through location, remove an add component to location, and of course, keep track of transferring your file sequence as well. We wrap it all up in locations so you don't have to reinvent the wheel when you need powerful to take control of your publishing files. So let's start disambiguating a bit. If you have been using ftrack for a while and you have been using Connect, you know that the first thing that Connect does when it starts up is to ask you if you have been configuring a storage scenario. So storage scenario really are not part of this webinar, and we'll see why in a second. We will be focusing more on location itself, because what is a storage scenario? A storage scenario, it's basically a location. Is a coded location as the other one that we will look into it, but brings with it the ability of being configured from the web interface. So of course, this is going to be more a producer's tooling case, where producers will have the ability of configuring these things, where location code will be more about TDs and pipeline developers that will maintain it. There is no wrong or right way. The only big difference, of course, is that if you want to implement a storage scenario rather than a simple location, you will have to implement also the logic for the web interface and how it will react and how we'll set the data. This is off the scope of this webinar this time. Now, back to locations. So going back to location, if you have been looking around the ftrack server, you might have noticed already that you can have many locations. And these locations are registered under the media management locations. And you can just click create and give it a name, a label, and a description, and it will register. If you look into this list, you will see there is a bunch of names of locations. Few starts with the ftrack and others are really custom. Those are the ones that I usually use or randomly use for testing and other things. But let's start seeing which location ftrack does provide by default. So the built-in ftrack locations are 3. You might find more, but these are the most important. You might find more, but this is really the most important one to look into. So you have the ftrack server, which basically allows to deal publish and retrieve files from the storage server itself. So basically the cloud storage of your instance or your local instance storage as well. The ftrack unmanaged, it's basically will register the path of what you have been publishing, but will not manage the file themselves. So basically, it won't let you remove, it won't let you do much about them. It will simply store the data. And the original location, on the other hand, will have a similar behavior, but will retain the original file path and will let you manage the files themselves. But what does happen if you don't set a storage? So if you do not have a storage, you will notice that publishing either through the API or Connect will bring an ftrack unmanaged location. So this ftrack unmanaged location basically is the basic things that you can use as storage, which is not the most powerful one among all the others. So that's why I do suggest using either a storage scenario or configuring a proper location. This is the ftrack unmanaged. So basically, this will simply pick the source file that you provided during the publishing and will register that one into ftrack. So won't provide you much of the power that a proper location or a storage scenario will provide to you. So this is not suggested to be used unless you know what you're doing with this. So let's start looking into what common or not common location use are. So of course, we can start thinking about multi-site collaboration. So I could have my user home and with his own local location, user location. I could have a cloud transfer location, maybe in Amazon S3, and then I have a third location in my studio. And this location can transfer data between each other. I could have a freelancer location, similar concept, but without the middleman storage into the cloud. So I could just be having a freelancer location, a storage location to my office, freelancer connected with VPN. I publish locally, I transfer the data when production or someone else into the pipeline requires to use my file. Backup location. We all know we have to free up space when the production is over. You can have logic, for example, that will move all the published files and approved files, for example, into a cloud storage, an Amazon or any other cloud storage location that will let you store the data for a long period of time in pretty cheap. Client delivery structure, that's another use that I've seen many times. So for example, happens often in production that your client want to have all the names published in his naming convention, no, the one that your studio has been using for many, many years. And this usually ends up on being little script that has to take some names and convert them. In ftrack, what you can do actually, and might want to do, is to actually create a structure for your delivery. So your client will have his own structure, and when you transfer the file to their location, they will simply get named correctly for your client. And that could be accessible. For example, it could be an FTP location where you upload the files for your client. Proxy location is really an advanced concept, but which can be modeled on top of the location system, but basically is a filter publish logic. So let's say you have a location, and when you publish that location, you want to check, for example, what file type you're publishing. And if it's an image sequence, you might want to send it to the sun. And if it's 3D files, you might want to send them to the NAS. So etc. So really, the limit is the sky in this case. Just think about what you need, and I'm sure you're gonna find a really useful case for the location. Now we're gonna put the location on hold for a second here, and we're gonna start looking into the other bit that you need to have control of in order to understand how to manage files. We won't be looking much in details about it, but we will be looking at what is a component. In this case, we will be looking not overall how to create components, but just about the interaction that you can have between component and locations. So, but let's start with the basics. So what is a component? The component is the end result of the publishing process. So it will live under an asset version. The component represent a tracked file. So of course, it's whatever you have published that will be inside the component and will be represented by a file path in a given location. Something to bear in mind, components always require to have an existing asset version to be published to. Why? Because we need a version fixed. So first we will have to say to the server, I book a version. So basically you publish a version, I book this version, and then I start adding components to it. So it's possible to calculate where the file path / version something will end up to. Something to bear in mind, of course, is the asset versions can contain multiple components, and each component can live in multiple locations at the same time. So which means that, for example, your Maya file animation could be having your Maya binary centrally stored, but your cache file might be in someone else's location, still part of the asset version, but that component is simply living somewhere else. It just has to be transferred over. Depending on the file type that you are going to publish, components are specialized. You will deal likely with file component and sequence component. Although when you will query, you can query components, file components, and sequence components separately. Components will bring them all. So if you want to have one file, query for file component. If you want to have image sequences or file sequences to be retrieved, you use queries against the sequence component. So as we said, components can live in multiple locations. How can we visually see that? Through the web interface. So you might go used by now about the publishing page, the versions, and the components that lives within the version. Now you have the component name. Underneath, you have the location, which usually is just one. But once you start having more location where the component is published, you will be able to select which one to represent. Bear in mind, the ftrack server will represent first the location that is closest, well, which has higher priority for you. So in case you are, for example, into a user location, your local file path will come up. If you are at the studio, the central location will show up. So let's start see how we can interact with the components and what kind of operation we can have between components and locations. So due to the fact that you remember we said the location are built-in layers, and then of course that's here is where we can see how powerful this system is. So basically we're gonna start doing really complex operation, but with simple commands. So for example, we simply want to take one component from a location and add it to another location. So in this case, I might just want to transfer my file from my local disk to the central storage of the company. Destination location, which will be the centralized storage scenario of the company, add component, the component I want to transfer, source location. Behind the curtains, the file will be transferred. Remove component, same thing. You will be removing the component from that location. Now, bear in mind, removing component does not mean deleting components. That's a different thing, and we won't be looking into the component operation in that kind of components operation. This is, again, just in relation with the location system. But the file won't be removed. So you are removing the component from a given location. You are not removing the actual files. So when you do operate with components, you also have to be aware there will be event that will be emitted. One for when a component is added to allocations, and one for when a component is removed from the locations. Now, why is this important? Because, of course, these events can be are broadcasted in ftrack, which means that you can listen to these events from any of the sessions that are connected to the same server. Which means that, for example, you can trigger the transfer between two remote locations. You could be triggering, let's say, for example, from an Amazon cloud to the ftrack centralized storage scenario, not having access to those, because you can access these events and react to those as well if you need to. So now let's start looking how to actually do something useful with the location. So how to retrieve a file path. So first off, API will provide you a really easy way to pick your current location, which is the peak location. Peak location will return the highest priority. We're going to look more in details about these things in a bit, but that's basically your main location. So peak location will return the location you use by default to publish to. So if you want to know where a file lives, you need to know which location you want to retrieve the path from. So you can simply take the location, get file system path, you pass the component, and this will return decomposed file path of your on your disk. What if the file does not exist in the locations? You will be notified with a component not in location. Let's see. So then, yes, something else that we have to keep in mind, of course, is that whenever you deal with locations, with Python code and ftrack itself, there is a bunch of environment variables that you want to keep in mind. So this is the ftrack plugin event plugin path. This ftrack event plugin path is used by the API and API only, and this is where ftrack API will look for its own plugin. Connect has its own environment, which is the ftrack connect plugin path. And then, of course, any custom code that you will have, you want to use will have to be reachable through the Python path. So you have to be able to import these modules in order to make it work. So now let's start looking into how actually register a location. Now we have the basis. So when the session start, we'll emit an event. Basically, when the session is initializing, we'll call this event, which is the configure location that you will have to respond to. And in here, we are able now to start seeing a bit more intimately how the location is composed and structured. So basically, from the bottom up, we can see the register function. And in this case, we are gonna to react to the ftrack API session configure location, which is the one we want to. And in this case, we're gonna simply trigger this configure location, which will accept our event coming in from the session. First thing, of course, we want a session. There are various ways of doing that. The easy way is to extract the session from the event itself. So we pick the session, and we're gonna do so we're gonna ensure that this location exists. This is actually, I think, is a mistype. I'll be fixing this into the. There is an example that will come later. I will fix that there. But basically, what we're doing here, we're ensuring that the location exists. So if you do remember the first slides, we have a list of location on the web server. Doing session ensure, basically, what we do is create if it doesn't exist and return it. So in this case, we are ensuring there is an ftrack webinar into our server. If it doesn't exist, we'll be creating one and we'll return it. Second thing, we're going to set a priority. In this case, we're going to set a priority to 1. And then we're going to have a prefix, which is basically where we want to save our files. And we're going to start creating an assessor. So basically, we're going to tell this is where my file lives. This is the root file, the root of my path. And this is my storage, basically, the root of where I want to start publishing my files. But how I'm going to publish my files, that's up to the structure itself, which gets initialized right after. So location.assessor will pick up the assessor, location.structure will pick up the structure. At this point, the location will be registered and available to use. You want to check if your location is picked up, you will simply do the pick location and you will double check that the location is loaded at startup time. So again, what we do see here, we have these 3 elements that we're dealing with. We have the location entity itself that we queried from the ftrack server. And then we have the assessor and the structure location plugin. So as you do see, these are not coming from the server. These are coming from actual Python modules. And this is really important to keep in mind for later. So what we have here is location, again, are ftrack entities. Location plugins are Python code, and the location property is the priority is a property. So sorry. And this is also defined locally. What does that mean? That these 3 things, assessor, location, and priority, can be defined locally to the machines or to the various different clients. So let's look on how the priority works. So we said we can have many locations. The first one will be represented by the peak location, which will be the default one. So which means that you can have various locations, but the lower the number of this priority, the higher will be the priority itself. So if I have, for example, the location, usually the default location in ftrack will have a number of 95. Of course, so location 94 will take precedence over the one that you have registered. Location 98 will be picked up later. So your location will still be your main locations. And this is useful, of course, to model your location based on where you are. So due to the fact that priority is local, in my computer, the central location or another location could be having different priorities. Maybe I want to have my user location first, and I want to have my backup locations, and some other sites might want to have different things, but based on the same concepts. What else? Okay, so let's start looking also in what we do provide off the shelf in ftrack as assessor. So as we said, the assessor is the first part. It's where files, not how files will be stored. So assessor is the first bit. And so assessor define really what is the protocol for the storage type. And what they really do, the assessor does the heavy loading. So coding the assessor, of course, is the trickiest bit because you will have to deal with raw data mostly. And so why we provide 2 base assessor with our 2 built-in assessor with our ftrack API. And this is the disk assessor, which is used by default to access any of the data on mount points, local disk, and any similar things. And the server assessor, which is what allows our API to push to publish and retrieve data such as thumbnails, reviewable, and other things that are stored server side. So these are the 2 built-in, and of course, as much as for the assessor, we do provide the structure as well for built-ins. So these are for common use. The storage scenario will basically be using the standard structure, which is listed last into this. So let's see which one are available. So we have the ID structure, which basically it's a 5-path composed by unique parts of the ID of your entity. And this will ensure a uniqueness of the published path. Of course, the result published path, it won't be human readable. Same goes for the entity ID, but rather than splitting it off into subfolders, it just dumps everything into a unique list of entity IDs and the extensions. The original structure won't be doing much. It will be simply registering the source of the publish. Guess where the original structure is used, origin location. Standard structures is what you commonly use, and it's what we usually suggest to use for visual effects or general production, because what does it do? It basically represents the data hierarchy of your project. So you will be having the project sequence, however you model your project, it will be represented on your file system. The other structures can have their use, so think about which one could be more fitting for your project. For example, in places where I've been working in the past, it was pretty common to use something like an ID structure on a hidden folder to enforce our artists to use the asset management system and not be tempted to manipulate manually files. So basically, people were publishing, files were kind of disappearing somewhere into a .vault folder with hash IDs everywhere, and people were retrieving data just from the asset management system. This is an advanced use, but for some places might work. So if you want to take out the risk of users modifying the file system, that could be one. Of course, brings its own risks. You won't be able to know what each file is without the database itself at hand. Let's go through and have a really brief recap of what we saw. And then we're gonna start looking into some deep dive of location and structure concepts. So what locations are? So locations are the high level asset object, which will let you deal with assessor and structure plugin. So it will simply provide high-level access to whatever lives underneath. There is not much of a difference between a location and a storage scenario. Basically, the only thing that the storage scenario brings is the visual configuration that you can do through the web server. ftrack, the Python API, we provide built-in assessor and structure, which are ready to use, as much as location, which are ready to use if you need. Assessor, structure are locally registered to the session, not to the server entity. Same goes for priority. So priority is only valid for your local location. Location can emit events and do emit events when you operate on them, and this can be listened to so you can do something with this. For example, you can listen to an event of a file transferred to a cloud location, so you know when the file will be ready to be pulled from the cloud location to be transferred somewhere else, triggered by a chain of ftrack events. I really hope up until now it's pretty clear. We have been trying so far just to basically have an overall idea on how location works and how are composed and how are registered. So this is just the basic on how location are. But please bear in mind that all the things that we're going and we are looking into this webinar are mostly available into our help. And by the end, I will try to recollect all the sources of this. But this information is available. So please try to spend some time in our help and our documentation, because of course, there is much more to learn. This is, of course, as much as this is what we're going to do next is a deep dive, there's more to be discovered. And this is left to you to learn more on this pretty cool technology that we do provide. But let's keep on looking. I'm sure this new part will like many of you. So let's go nerd. Okay, so this is how how the old location component and context it's composed when it's published to ftrack. So if we start from the top down and in the middle, that's our context. So project sequence shot, our hero asset, our modeling task, and our modeler, which has just published one version. Let's start on the left side. We're gonna start looking into the most simple, of course, of the examples, which is the file component. You remember, file component, sequence component. File components deals with single file, sequence component with file sequences. So let's start with the simple one. See, single file component, when I do location get file system, I will get the result path of my component, but where this information comes from. So something you have to remember is that basically ftrack do not store the final file path for you. What does ftrack store is the metadata and information about your file, and out of that, we recompose and rebuild through the structure plugin the final location of where that file can be found. This is part of why locations are so powerful, because you can manipulate as you do like based on abstract data your file path, and you can recompose it and extract information as you wish. So in this case, we have a file component that contains the name, the file type, the size, and the file type itself, which is linked to an entity which we won't be looking much into this. This is one of the famous bits that I suggest you, if you're really curious about location, to look into. But basically, the component location is an entity that physically links the component to the location. So it's what tells the component you're into this location, or tells the location you own this component in this place. And underneath, you can see the component, that the location, that in this case is a centralized storage scenario with a priority 10, which contains a transformer. Again, this is a bit, we won't be looking into this webinar because it's way more advanced, and I thought it might bring confusion into the pot. So feel free, in case to, if you know about this, feel free to bring it up during the QA by the end. But if not, have a look. It's really interesting, but a really advanced concept. But anyhow, what we want to have here is a really overview of the component in this case. And the important bit that I want you to understand is they do not retain the file path. And when you deal with sequence components, the game gets slightly more complicated, because of course the sequence component it's basically a container that will retain file components. Because you can transfer things between sites, this is what will allow you to know, for example, when you're transferring file sequences, how far of the file sequence has been transferred. Because what will happen is that you first publish the sequence component, so it means the file sequence will be available into another site, but the availability will be 0, because no file of that file component has been transferred yet. So more files will be transferred, more the availability of the file will become available. And of course, the component, the sequence component and the file component will have their own component in location, because they could be living in different places at the same time, as we saw. So how do we use the location? So the location in this case, we're gonna you can open any shell. So pick a session, pick location. Let's print our name, the location name. As any other ftrack entity, you will interact with location as dictionaries. So you can simply pick the name. Remember, the priority is a property, so will be set, and we can query as any other priority in ftrack. The location structure will be returned, the object itself, and same goes for the assessor. So this is really your first check for your location. If any of these returns known, likely the structure or the assessor, something has not been properly registered, and your location won't be able to publish successfully. So these are the things you want to double check when you write your location. You try to import from within your DCC application code, and you're sure that your location is properly loaded. So how to customize location? So Of course, when we think about customizing location, it's mostly an overriding game. So code-wise, what you will have to do is to import one of our base classes or built-in modules, whether location, structure, or accesses, and start overriding the various methods that compose the interface of the objects. And mostly really means overriding the abstract methods of it, and to provide the similar functionalities. One of the things that, of course, I want to remind you again, of course, that if you do write custom code for accessory structures, and these, for example, includes modules, external modules, all these things will have to be available into the Python path in order to be properly loaded. So now let's start looking into what a custom accessor looks like. And as we said, the accessor really is about the heavy lifting of the data. So it will be represented as a file object. Custom structure, the structure really is mostly just overriding the method that it's the get resource identifier. Get resource identifier, it will accept an entity as input and will return the full compose path. So when you do get file system path, that's what gets called, and will return you the file system of your path. And this is where you want to customize your path in order to have your custom output. So let's start. What we're going to look now briefly, because I can see I'm already running out of time. It's to have an overview abstract look on how it works when you, for example, want to manipulate your get resource identifier to compose your output file path custom. So what we do, of course, we're going to start with a version, because is what we're going to try to get information from. So our entity will be the component, because that's what we pass in. But then we want to start from the version, because we want to know the version that has been published. We want to get the asset. We want to get links. So what links are? Links are an attribute of your entities that will basically provide you up and down links for your entity. So in this case, bin component, while lifting of ftrack, basically asking the links, will be providing all the upstream information, which in a hierarchy basically is where your file will live into the file system. So that's what we do. We take all the links. We just have an inline for loop where we extract all the names. We just skip the last one, which will be the component itself that we don't need now. And we basically start building we start adding the fragments to the final path fragments, and we're going to just keep composing. So next to it, you can see basically every single bit that is going to get added. So we're going to get the version, we're going to get the project, we're going to get the structure names. It basically will be sequence, shot, and task. And then we're going to get the asset name, our hero, and then we're going to compose our version, and then we're going to compose our file name, and then we're going to return it lower. Now, bear in mind, this, of course, is a really simplified version because it does not take into account the type of component. So in case of a sequence component, you want to deal with it in a slightly different way. So again, this is just an example code, but it's just for you to try to understand how the system works. Now, what is then? Now is a little tutorial that I wanted to run you through in order to do something with these locations that we just learned about. So I want to create a user location, so with some constraints. So this is something I've been tasked and I need to get done. So I want a location which allows me to publish to my local machine. So of course, I have a central location, but I'm playing with stuff. I don't want to publish stuff centrally, maybe because I'm at home and I'm not at the office, but I want to work into the office environment. I want to have my user location. I want to publish to my local disk. I want to be really simple to set up so I can send it around as, of course, as a freelancer, as we said, I want to have to take precedence over the storage scenario. As a producer, I want to make it easy to distribute to freelancers. So it's just, that's it, with a zip file, whatever it is, you take it, you install, and that's it, zero configuration. And as a developer, of course, because we are notoriously lazy, we want to maintain as less code as possible. Of course, that's also because it's less likely to bring bugs. So less code, better in some degrees. Let's see now, how do we write a user location with this constraint? So let's kick off. Okay, top, we're gonna have our common imports, import OS, sys, functool, login, get pass, API, ftrack API, and from the ftrack API, we're gonna get our disk and our standard structure. Code less, code better. Focus on the feature that you want. We're gonna create a logger. We're gonna create a location, a variable location name. Now, keep this in mind because will come handy later on. But what we're gonna do here, we're gonna use the get pass get user to get the user that's logged in into the machine, and we're gonna compose this variable with .local. So basically, we're gonna have Lorenzo.local, and this is my new location name. I'll create a this prefix. I'll simply guess that there has to be a document folder, and in there I want to have a local ftrack project, which is unlikely to exist already. So of course, first thing I will do, I will check if this folder does exist. If it doesn't exist, I'll go in and create it. The setup is almost there. We have the location name that we want, which is unique because it's based on my name. It could be anything else. It could be the ftrack login name. It could be anything else you want, of course, but better using the name so you can identify where the file actually lives. And then this prefix, so where the file is gonna get stored. And now we're gonna go through and configure the location. So here we go. So this is the actual use, and I'm sorry for the previous example that was wrong on how to use the ensure. So this is the actual ensure. It really look like the get function of this session. So ensure location with the name, location name is my Lorenzo.local in this case. Ensure location will return my newly created or retrieved location from the server. I attach my disk accessor where I pass my prefix, so my root folder that will be my document file, my document folder, ftrack user projects, and I'll use just the standard structure. I don't care. I just want to have the files saved in a consistent way that they simply won't get lost. And I'll simply set a negative number for my priority, because all the ftrack location have positive number. So in order to be picked up before any other, I will simply set a negative number, and just to play safe, I'm setting -100. So kind of sure it will be the first location to be discovered. And then I'll simply print out a warning just to let me know what's the location name, what the prefix, and what's priority I've been registering to, just to have an idea. And this print will happen every single time this location is loaded. At this point, it's a matter of registering the location. So we're gonna have the usual check for the instance of when registering. We simply go and double check if the folder where we're going to publish is existing, and then finally we register with the function. In this case, basically is a lambda because we want to pass the session into the function itself. So looking back, you can see the configure location. I have session and events. Using the lambda is basically what you're providing. You're wrapping everything and providing the session as part of the arguments they're passing in. That's it. This is your user location, and this is available. I'll provide you the links by the end of in a few minutes where to retrieve it. And this is basically, you will have to drop it into your plugin folder. You start ftrack with a couple of caveats we will see in a second, and that will let you publish locally to your disk, even if you do have a storage location available. Now, this is the result. So we have the location that saves locally. The location is able to configure and register itself, so 0 configuration. We have the location with higher priority, so always will be first. The location can be zipped and sent by email, so my producer will be absolutely happy to do bulk emails to the freelancers. And as a developer, I can keep on being lazy because I can use what ftrack does provide. With this, basically, we're getting by the end of this webinar. I just want to go to a few tips and tricks, which are really important. So using custom structure and accessor with Connect, working with location from events, using temporary location, and updating, altering production structure. So using structure and accessor with Connect. Something that is important to remember is that ftrack connect will sanitize the environment variable whenever you start some application or action. So which means basically that the Python path, the ftrack event plugin path will be stripped off. What does this mean? That this information, when your application will start, won't be available anymore. So the session won't be able to register the location again. So what you want to do is to ensure that your hook will react to the events that connect emits, such as the ftrack connect application launch or ftrack event action launch, and you react to this to register again the bits and pieces that you require. So in this case, for example, it could be resetting the ftrack event plugin path as well as the Python path. So the modules will be back available from your interpreter. Working with location from events. Now, this is a bit of a tricky one, but basically what does happen, because locations are registered through events, your script might unlikely get registered before the location. So if you do try to access the location, your location won't be available at that point in time. So what happens is ftrack API session, by the end of this loading cycle, will emit an event, which is the ftrack API session ready, you can hook into. So when you react to that event, everything in the session has been done. And so you can ensure your location is available. And this is how you use it. So basically what you need is to have a double registration system. So you want to have the session ready, which we'll call the underscore register, which then basically will be able to manipulate the location in being sure that this location does exist. So basically that's how you do it. And then in order to react to the other events internally, you will have another function that will be called, which is the post-publish function. In this case, will be reacting to the component added to location events. Using temporary location, this is a little trick, which I think some of you might find handy. So let's say, for example, you want to publish something, but you really don't want to publish it on disk. You can have an ftrack origin, basically is a temporary location where you can temporarily store file, and that will be available. So you can use it. This will just available for the duration of the session. So you can just store some stuff there, and then by the end of the session, won't be there anymore. It won't be tracked. The file will be there, but you won't be tracked by ftrack anymore. And to close, just a little suggestion: if you're updating production, the structure in production, please do not do it. Don't modify your structure with production data. You have highly risk to lose your production data and raising your producers, your visual effects and CG supervisor, and all your crew. So please do not manipulate your structure live. Always, always, always create another structure, create another location, and transfer the data to ensure data are consistent across. Also, be aware, modifying the structure is on you. So you can also risk to overwrite files. So please be careful when you customize structure, because if you're not careful, you might risk to lose data. So that's why I suggest start with visual effect, the standard structure we provide. If you want to have your own, write your own and transfer the file over until you're sure your data are consistent and robust. With this, basically, we are by the end of it. Sorry, I think we have been running a bit longer than we were expected to. Few resources. So of course, most of this webinar has been taken by our documentation and online help. Plus, of course, a bit more graphs and more information to try to give you what I hope you wanted. Please go into our resources, of course, ftrack API, ftrack recipes, our help, and the user location code, which we saw earlier is available in our Bitbucket snippets. External, we have Nifty Digitals. We have been writing and been contributing with an Amazon S3 assessor that you can use for creating multi-site transfer tools in order to have a cloud backup tool and so on. And of course, this is a little trick, but if you look into GitHub or Bitbucket for ftrack, believe me, you'll find a lot of custom things that is open and free for everyone. So use it. Feel free to look into it and let us know. And at this point, we'll leave you, if you're still alive and breathing, with questions, if you have any.
There's a couple questions here, Lorenzo, for you. So let's start with the first one is from Stefan Ichringer. I hope I'm saying that correct.
Hi, Stefan.
Hello. Hi, can that proxy location setup also be used to copy some of the type files, but not other type files?
That is exactly how the proxy location works, Stefan. That's exactly it. So basically the idea is that your proxy location will act as a proxy. So you can call it a filter location if you like, but basically what you will have to embed is basically is the logical gates. So if this is file type, you'll do this. If it's not file type, you'll do that. Now, my suggestion is if you want to write a proxy location, leave the entities, the actual entities, the two location. Your proxy location will just be a fake location, basically. There will be a Python object mimicking the interface of a location. And in there, you will embed your logical gates that will define what file types, for example, will decide to which location you will be sending the file to. I really hope it helps your question.
I hope so too. So a lot of this is way over my head. And if it doesn't answer your question, Stefan, then if you're still here, please follow up. That's right.
Yes.
Next question comes from Mark Mante. Again, sorry for pronouncing the names wrong. How to intercept and use the location events for file deletion, in brackets Python.
Well, that's basically is what we saw. So basically what you can do is to intercept the file removed if you want to delete the file. So basically what you can do is to hook into, it's pretty easy. So if you do just write an event listener, just a really 5 lines of Python, and you listen to the ftrack removed, the component removed, you should be able to see when this event gets triggered, and you can extract the information that you want, and at that point manipulate. Now, of course, if you want to delete files, something you have to double check you are in the actual location where the file exists, or it's been removed. That's the only thing I would be really careful about.
Okay. And then question from the same Mark.
Sure.
Do I have to register my location plugin to the ftrack.connect.application.launch in order to have it available on DCC launch, or is subscribing to the ftrack.session.configure-location enough?
So, of course, if you do set the ftrack event plugin path, that will pick up the configure location, of course, by itself when the session gets created. But in order to ensure, you might want to also have the Python path set, because that might get removed. And especially, actually, that gets removed during the launching the integration, as we said. So ftrack event plugin path will be sanitized, Python path will be sanitized, and so you want to reintroduce these two environment variables that then will be pointing to the registration of the location that will react then to the actual configure location, basically. So what happens is that when you start the application, you want to tell to the Python interpreter what the new ftrack event plugin path is, which is where your location will be listening for the configure location events coming from the session. I really hope it helps.
Hope so too, but like I said, that's gone well over my head. And I think that's the end of our questions. If you guys have any more, please do send them in. I'm sure Lorenzo will be more than happy to answer those. And yes, Lorenzo, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you, guys. And yes, I'll be looking forward to have, of course, suggestion and how to improve these webinars. And if you want to have more of this technical side of ftrack, please let us know.
Yeah, email in, do let us know. There will be, as Lorenzo just mentioned, there will be a feedback sheet being sent out. Please do fill those out. The more you request things, the more likely that will come up. Thanks, Roman. Thanks for attending, everyone, and see you on the next one.
Have a good one.